the rejection. Malcolm Jones sat in his small, cluttered apartment, staring at the 3 paintings propped against the wall. Each piece was a labor of love, filled with vivid colors, bold strokes, and intricate details that told the stories of his life. One depicted a bustling neighborhood street, alive with laughter and movement. Another showed an elderly black woman with a warm, knowing smile, her face lined with decades of wisdom. The final painting was the most personal, a self-portrait of a young boy sitting by a window, lost in thought, with sunlight streaming through worn curtains. His late mother's voice echoed in his mind, "Paint what you feel, Malcolm. Paint the truth." She had been his first and greatest supporter, encouraging him to pursue his passion, despite the challenges he faced. Her death 3 years ago had left a void in his life, but her words still guided him. Today, he was taking the next step in his journey. For years, Malcolm had struggled to break into the art world, working odd jobs and painting late into the night. But now, he had secured an appointment with Edward Davenport, the owner of one of the most prestigious galleries in the city. Davenport's gallery was known for launching the careers of contemporary artists, and Malcolm hoped this meeting would finally give him the break he needed. The meeting. Malcolm arrived at the Davenport Gallery 15 minutes early, his 3 paintings carefully wrapped and clutched tightly in his hands. The gallery was pristine, with its white walls and polished floors creating a stark contrast to the vibrant, chaotic energy of his artwork. Visitors in designer suits and dresses moved silently, sipping champagne and studying minimalist sculptures that seemed to whisper, rather than shout, their messages. He approached the reception desk, where a young woman with a sharp bob and a sharper attitude glanced up at him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone more a challenge than a question. "I have an appointment with Mr. Davenport," Malcolm said, trying to keep his voice steady. After a few clicks on her computer, she nodded. "Wait here." Minutes later, Edward Davenport appeared, a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair and an air of practiced indifference. His tailored suit and crisp tie screamed wealth and sophistication. "Mr. Jones," he said, extending a hand. "I understand you have some work to show me." "Yes, sir," Malcolm replied, shaking his hand. "Thank you for taking the time." Davenport led him to a small, well-lit room at the back of the gallery. "Let's see what you've brought," he said, motioning for Malcolm to unpack his paintings. Malcolm carefully unwrapped the first piece, the neighborhood street scene, and placed it on an easel. He hesitated for a moment, then unwrapped the other 2 and arranged them side by side. He stepped back, his heart pounding, as Davenport studied the paintings. The critique. For a moment, Davenport said nothing. He stepped closer to the paintings, his head tilted slightly as his sharp eyes darted across the canvases. Malcolm felt the tension in the room rise with every second of silence. Finally, Davenport spoke. "Well," he said, his voice cool and measured, "they're certainly colorful." Malcolm blinked. "Thank you," he said cautiously, unsure if it was a compliment. Davenport smirked. "But they're also unpolished. The brushstrokes lack finesse, the compositions are cluttered, and the overall effect is amateurish. This sort of thing might sell at a community art fair, but it's not what we're looking for here." Malcolm's stomach tightened. "I see," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "What about the stories they tell? The emotions they convey?" Davenport waved a dismissive hand. "Art isn't just about emotion, Mr. Jones. It's about refinement, sophistication. My clientele expects a certain level of polish, something your work simply doesn't have." The words hit Malcolm like a punch to the gut. He had poured his soul into those paintings, and to have them dismissed so casually felt like an insult not only to his talent but to his very identity. Davenport straightened his tie and gave Malcolm a tight-lipped smile. "I appreciate your effort, but I don't think this is the right fit. Good luck with your endeavors." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Malcolm standing alone in the small room. Heartbreak and determination. Malcolm wrapped his paintings in silence, his mind racing with a mix of emotions, anger, disappointment, and a deep sense of inadequacy. As he left the gallery, the sounds of the city surrounded him, but he barely noticed. Davenport's words echoed in his mind, unpolished. Amateurish. Not the right fit. By the time Malcolm reached his apartment, the initial sting of rejection had given way to something stronger, determination. He thought about his mother, how she had always believed in his talent, and how she had taught him to persevere in the face of adversity. He set his paintings down and stared at them for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, he picked up his brushes and began to paint. Davenport might not have seen the value in his work, but Malcolm knew it was there. He wouldn't let one man's opinion define his worth. "I'll show them," Malcolm muttered to himself. "One day, they'll see." It was a vow, a promise to himself and to his mother's memory. Malcolm would succeed on his own terms, no matter how long it took. A breakthrough moment. The rejection at the Davenport Gallery might have crushed Malcolm Jones, but instead, it ignited a fire within him. Returning to his modest apartment, he stared at the paintings Davenport had dismissed and felt a mix of anger, sadness, and determination. Malcolm had always used art as a way to process his emotions, and now, he poured every ounce of his frustration into his work. Channeling pain into art. For weeks, Malcolm hardly left his studio. He painted late into the night, his brush moving with a ferocity he hadn't known before. Each stroke was an act of defiance, a declaration that his story, his community, his identity, deserved to be told. The result was a series of pieces that were raw, vibrant, and deeply personal. One painting depicted a young black boy staring out of a broken window, his expression a mix of hope and despair. The cracked glass reflected a kaleidoscope of colors, symbolizing the duality of beauty and struggle. Another piece showed a group of neighbors gathered on a stoop, their faces etched with laughter and resilience, while the world around them seemed to blur with chaos. Each piece was a testament to Malcolm's journey, to the stories he carried in his heart. But as much as he believed in his work, he knew that belief alone wouldn't pay the bills. His savings were dwindling, and he was running out of supplies. A fateful encounter. One sunny afternoon, Malcolm decided to display his paintings at a small art fair in a nearby park. It wasn't ideal, his work would be competing with amateur crafts and kitschy decorations, but it was all he could afford. He set up his booth with 3 of his most powerful pieces and sat back, hoping someone would notice. The fair bustled with families and tourists, but most people passed Malcolm's booth with only a brief glance. Some offered polite compliments, but few lingered. By late afternoon, Malcolm began to feel the familiar weight of doubt creeping in. Then she arrived. A woman in her early 50s, with a sleek, tailored coat and an air of quiet authority, stopped in front of Malcolm's booth. Her sharp eyes scanned his paintings, lingering on the one of the boy and the cracked window. "Who painted these?" she asked, her voice carrying a calm confidence. "I did," Malcolm replied, standing up. He wasn't sure if her interest was genuine, but something about her presence commanded his attention. She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "These are extraordinary." "Thank you," Malcolm said, his voice cautious. He had heard kind words before, only to be met with rejection. The woman extended her hand. "I'm Elena Hughes. I write for the Art Perspective. Have you heard of it?" Malcolm blinked in surprise. The Art Perspective was one of the most respected art publications in the country. Elena Hughes was a legendary critic, known for her sharp eye and ability to catapult unknown artists into the spotlight. "I have," Malcolm said, shaking her hand. "It's an honor to meet you." Elena smiled. "The honor's mine. Your work has a voice, raw, emotional, unapologetic. It's refreshing. I'd like to feature you in my column." Malcolm's heart skipped a beat. "You would?" "Absolutely," Elena said, her tone matter of fact. "The world needs to see this." The turning point. True to her word, Elena published a glowing feature on Malcolm's work the following week. Titled "The Power of Perspective, The Art of Malcolm Jones," the article described his paintings as a vibrant tapestry of life's complexities, blending pain and joy with masterful storytelling. She highlighted his journey, his dedication, and his ability to capture the humanity in every subject. The response was immediate. Collectors began calling, galleries expressed interest, and Malcolm's social media accounts were flooded with messages of praise and admiration. One message stood out: a prestigious auction house wanted to feature one of his paintings in an upcoming event. Malcolm chose the piece of the boy with the cracked window, titling it Fragments of Hope. On the night of the auction, he stood at the back of the room, watching nervously as the bidding began. The opening bid of $20,000 was already more than he had ever dreamed of making from a single painting. The numbers climbed quickly: $30,000, $000, $50,000, $80,000. By the time the gavel struck, Fragments of Hope had sold for $125,000. The room erupted into applause, but Malcolm could only stand in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. National attention. The sale of Fragments of Hope made headlines in the art world, solidifying Malcolm's status as a rising star. Major galleries and museums began reaching out, eager to showcase his work. He was invited to speak at art events and panel discussions, where he shared his journey and the stories behind his paintings. But Malcolm's success wasn't just about the money or the recognition, it was about the opportunity to tell his truth on a larger stage. His work resonated with people because it was real, and he refused to compromise his vision. Through it all, Malcolm remained humble, remembering the struggle that had brought him here. And though the sting of Davenport's rejection still lingered, Malcolm felt a quiet sense of vindication. He had succeeded on his own terms, and the world was finally paying attention. But Malcolm's journey was far from over. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a force for change, and he was determined to use his platform to open doors for others. The meteoric rise. The success of Fragments of Hope at auction marked the beginning of Malcolm Jones' meteoric rise in the art world. Overnight, his name became synonymous with a new wave of artistic authenticity, an unflinching commitment to capturing the emotional landscapes of life. His work, once dismissed as unpolished, was now hailed as visionary, a bold celebration of resilience and humanity. A global sensation. Within months, Malcolm's paintings were featured in exhibitions across the country. Critics raved about his ability to tell stories through color and texture, describing his work as the heartbeat of a generation. Collectors clamored to acquire his pieces, driving auction prices to staggering heights. One of his most famous works, Resilience on the Stoop, sold for $1.8 million, breaking records for contemporary art by an emerging artist. International galleries soon joined the fray, inviting Malcolm to showcase his work in London, Paris, and Tokyo. His exhibitions were met with sold-out crowds and standing ovations, cementing his reputation as a global icon. Museums began acquiring his pieces for their permanent collections, recognizing the historical and cultural significance of his art. Despite the frenzy, Malcolm remained grounded. He turned down opportunities that felt inauthentic or exploitative, choosing instead to focus on work that aligned with his values. His art wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about connection, about giving voice to stories that had long been ignored. Giving back. As Malcolm's wealth grew, so did his desire to give back. He knew firsthand the struggles faced by young artists, particularly those from underrepresented communities, and he was determined to create opportunities for others. Using a portion of his earnings, he established the Colors of Resilience Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting emerging artists who lacked the resources to pursue their dreams. The foundation offered grants, mentorship programs, and fully funded residencies, ensuring that talented creators could focus on their art without the burden of financial stress. Malcolm also partnered with community organizations to fund after-school art programs, providing a safe space for children to explore their creativity. One of his proudest initiatives was the creation of a mobile art studio that traveled to underserved neighborhoods, bringing workshops and supplies directly to those who needed them most. Malcolm often visited these workshops in person, spending hours with the young artists, sharing his story, and encouraging them to tell their own. "Your voice matters," he would tell them. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The struggling gallery. Amid his whirlwind of success, Malcolm occasionally thought back to Edward Davenport and the rejection he had faced at the gallery. He no longer felt the sting of those words, time and triumph had dulled their edge, but he couldn't help wondering if Davenport ever thought about him. One evening, while browsing an art journal, Malcolm stumbled upon an article that answered his question. The Davenport Gallery, once a cornerstone of the city's art scene, was struggling to stay afloat. The article described how the gallery had failed to adapt to the changing tastes of the art world, clinging to an outdated aesthetic that no longer resonated with collectors. Malcolm felt a twinge of irony as he read about Davenport's financial woes. The man who had dismissed his work as unpolished was now facing the consequences of refusing to embrace diversity and innovation. But Malcolm didn't feel vindictive. Instead, he saw an opportunity, not for revenge, but for transformation. An idea takes shape. The more Malcolm thought about it, the clearer his vision became. The Davenport Gallery, with its prime location and established name, could become something extraordinary. What if it was reimagined as a space for underrepresented artists? A place where stories like his could find a platform, where young talent could flourish without fear of rejection or judgment? The idea consumed him, and Malcolm began to research the gallery's financial situation in detail. Through his network, he learned that Davenport was seeking investors to save the business. Malcolm decided to make an offer, not as an act of retaliation, but as a step toward creating lasting change in the art world. "It's time to rewrite the narrative," Malcolm said to himself, his determination solidifying. The Davenport Gallery wouldn't just survive, it would become a beacon for inclusion, innovation, and authenticity. With a plan in motion, Malcolm took the first steps toward turning his vision into reality. Little did Davenport know, the artist he had once dismissed was about to become his savior and his teacher. The confrontation. The Davenport Gallery, once a symbol of exclusivity and prestige, had fallen on hard times. The walls that once displayed the works of renowned artists now echoed with emptiness. Collectors had moved on to fresher, more diverse voices, leaving Edward Davenport scrambling to keep his business afloat. Bills piled up, staff dwindled, and whispers of the gallery's impending closure spread through the art world. What Davenport didn't know was that salvation was already in motion. The anonymous buyer. Malcolm Jones had spent weeks negotiating the purchase of the gallery through an intermediary. He wanted the sale to be seamless and discreet, no grand announcements, no press releases. His goal wasn't to humiliate Davenport but to transform the gallery into something greater. The sale was finalized on a crisp autumn morning. As Davenport signed the final documents in his office, he felt a mixture of relief and resignation. The buyer had insisted on anonymity, and while Davenport found the secrecy unsettling, he couldn't afford to question it. All that mattered was that his gallery was saved. The day of revelation. The announcement of the sale was set for the following week. Davenport invited his remaining staff and a few loyal patrons to a small gathering at the gallery to share the news. He stood in front of a modest crowd, straightening his tie and preparing to deliver his carefully rehearsed speech. "I want to thank you all for your support during these challenging times," Davenport began. "Today, I am pleased to announce that the Davenport Gallery has found a new owner, someone who recognizes the importance of preserving this institution's legacy." He glanced toward the doors as they swung open. Malcolm Jones stepped inside, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, exuding confidence and calm. Davenport's words faltered as recognition flickered across his face. "Malcolm," Davenport said, his voice wavering. What are you doing here?" Malcolm walked to the front of the room, his gaze steady. "I'm here because I'm the new owner of this gallery." The room fell silent. Davenport's face turned pale as he processed the revelation. "You?" he stammered. "You're the buyer?" "Yes," Malcolm said, his tone measured. "And I have a lot of plans for this place." The confrontation. For a long moment, Davenport simply stared at Malcolm, his mind racing. He remembered their first meeting vividly, the way he had dismissed Malcolm's work as unpolished, without a second thought. And now, The very artist he had rejected was standing before him as the gallery's savior. I didn't know, Davenport said finally, his voice heavy with regret. If I had. Malcolm held up a hand, cutting him off. You didn't care to know. And that's the problem, Edward. You dismissed me before you even tried to see me. You dismissed my work, my voice, and everything I represent because it didn't fit into your narrow definition of art. Davenport looked down, his posture deflated. You're right, he admitted. I was wrong. I'm not here to dwell on the past, Malcolm continued. I'm here to talk about the future, about what this gallery can become. A new vision. Malcolm turned to the small crowd, his voice steady and clear. This gallery has the potential to be something extraordinary. It can be a space where diverse voices are celebrated, where underrepresented artists can share their stories without fear of rejection. This isn't about exclusivity anymore, it's about inclusivity. It's about innovation. It's about telling the stories that matter. The audience erupted into quiet murmurs, nodding in agreement. Even Davenport looked up, his expression thoughtful. Malcolm returned his gaze to Davenport. I could have let this place go under, he said bluntly. But I didn't, because I believe in its potential. And I believe you can be part of that transformation, if you're willing to learn. Davenport blinked, caught off guard. You want me to stay? Yes, Malcolm said. You know this gallery, its history, and its connections. But things are going to be different. You'll need to let go of your old ways of thinking and embrace a new vision. If you're willing to do that, there's a place for you here. If not, then I'll find someone else who is. A humbling moment. Davenport stood silently for a moment, his face a mix of emotions. He had spent his career building the gallery into what he thought was a bastion of sophistication, but Malcolm's words had struck a chord. Perhaps he had been blind to the possibilities he had dismissed. I want to try, Davenport said finally, his voice quiet. I want to learn. Malcolm nodded. Good. Let's get to work. The beginning of change. In the weeks that followed, Malcolm and Davenport worked side by side to reshape the gallery. The sterile walls were replaced with vibrant, dynamic displays that showcased art from all walks of life. Emerging artists were given prime spots in exhibitions, and the gallery became a hub for workshops, panels, and community events. Davenport, initially hesitant, began to embrace the change. He listened to the artists' stories, watched the way their work connected with audiences, and slowly started to see the world through Malcolm's eyes. The transformation wasn't just about the gallery, it was about him, too. As the gallery prepared for its grand reopening, Davenport approached Malcolm in the newly renovated main hall. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. For giving me a second chance. Malcolm smiled. Thank you for taking it. The stage was set for a new era, one that would leave a lasting legacy not just for the gallery, but for the art world as a whole. A new era. The Davenport Gallery, once an exclusive haven for the privileged few, had undergone a transformation that few could have imagined. Under Malcolm Jones' leadership, the space had been rebranded as Visionary Art Studio, a vibrant, inclusive hub for groundbreaking talent and diverse voices. The cold, sterile walls were now alive with bold colors and dynamic textures, each piece telling a story of resilience, joy, and identity. For Malcolm, the gallery wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of what the art world could and should be. And it wasn't just about him, it was about creating a space where other artists could thrive. The vision takes shape. The months following the rebranding were a whirlwind of activity. Malcolm's team worked tirelessly to curate the first lineup of exhibitions, featuring artists from underrepresented communities. These creators brought stories and perspectives that had long been excluded from spaces like this. One exhibit, The Forgotten Streets, showcased the work of street artists, turning graffiti and murals into celebrated works of art. Another, Unseen Hands, highlighted the contributions of disabled artists, challenging stereotypes and pushing the boundaries of what art could be. Malcolm ensured the gallery also served as an educational space. Workshops, panels, and artist talks became regular features, giving emerging creators a platform to share their experiences and connect with the community. The energy in the gallery was electric. Visitors marveled not just at the art but at the sense of belonging it inspired. Davenport's transformation. For Edward Davenport, the transformation was as personal as it was professional. Initially resistant to the gallery's new direction, he had gradually embraced the change. Working alongside Malcolm, he began to see art through a different lens, not just as an object of value, but as a medium for connection and change. Davenport became an active mentor, offering guidance to young artists on navigating the complexities of the industry. His knowledge and experience, combined with Malcolm's vision, created a powerful synergy that benefited the entire gallery. One day, as Davenport sat with a group of young painters discussing exhibition strategies, he caught himself smiling. For the first time in years, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. "You know," he said to Malcolm later that evening, "I used to think I understood what art was about. But I've learned more in the past few months than I did in my entire career." "That's the power of opening your mind," Malcolm replied with a grin. "Art is more than what hangs on a wall, it's what it does to the people who see it." The grand reopening. The night of the grand reopening was a moment Malcolm had dreamed of for years. The gallery was packed with artists, collectors, critics, and members of the community. The air buzzed with excitement as visitors wandered through the newly curated exhibits, their faces lit with awe. In the center of the main hall, a small stage had been set up for the evening speeches. When it was Malcolm's turn to address the crowd, he stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. He looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, many new, and felt a swell of emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Malcolm began, his voice steady but filled with passion. Visionary Art Studio isn't just a gallery. It's a space for stories, stories that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of our shared humanity. He paused, scanning the room. "When I first started this journey, I was told my work wasn't good enough. That it was unpolished. At the time, those words hurt. But they also pushed me to prove that art isn't about fitting into someone else's definition of perfection. It's about truth. It's about connection." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. "This gallery exists to amplify those truths," Malcolm continued. "To give a platform to the voices that have been ignored for too long. Because representation matters. Every artist here tonight matters. And I promise, as long as I'm standing here, this space will always be a home for creativity, innovation, and authenticity." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Malcolm stepped back, his chest swelling with pride as he saw the impact his words had made. Reflection and legacy. Later that night, as the crowd began to disperse and the lights dimmed, Malcolm stood in the center of the gallery, taking it all in. The walls were filled with art that pulsed with life, each piece a testament to the power of representation. The space that had once rejected him now stood as a beacon of inclusion and progress. Davenport approached him, a glass of champagne in hand. "You did it, Malcolm," he said quietly. "You turned this place into something extraordinary." Malcolm smiled, his mind drifting to the past. He thought about his mother, her words echoing in his heart, "Paint what you feel." He had followed her advice, not just on the canvas, but in life. And now, he was building something that would outlast him, a legacy of art, truth, and opportunity. As he looked around the gallery, Malcolm felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but every step had led him here. He wasn't just creating art anymore, he was creating a movement. And this was only the beginning.